Welcome to the Strange Files, where reflection becomes emergence, taking ordinary things and spiraling them into life principles, metaphors, and new perspectives on possibility, seeing life from new angles. Have you ever looked at an ordinary object and thought, that can teach me something? Such as, a whisk can become a reflection on connection. A train track can become a way of understanding progressive recurrence. Even your housework can reveal something about maintenance, rhythm, and life. This podcast is a place for spiraling life principles through ordinary things and for exploring the reflections, patterns, and perceptions that shape how we move through life. It's an exploration about noticing and about what becomes possible when we see from new angles. I often use ordinary things as metaphors because everyday life can carry more meaning than we first notice. It's less about giving answers and more about opening exploration from a different lens. It's not overthinking. It's evolving thought that can provoke new perspectives. Awareness can refine expression. So hold on to your seats. This ride could get a little weird. I'm Lisa. Welcome to the Strange Files. Okay, time to decode another fairy tale. Let's psychologically analyse Snow White because apparently there has been areas of my life that I didn't even register at the time. But I do see it very clearly now. Have you ever really thought about Snow White? Not just as a fairy tale, but as a reflection. Because the older I get, the more I realise fairy tales probably weren't just stories for children. They feel more like symbolic maps of human behaviour hidden underneath fantasy. And Snow White is one of the strangest examples of that. Because when you actually look at the story, it's absolutely chaotic. A young woman gets removed from her familiar environment, lives with 7 tiny men representing different personality traits, avoids death multiple times, then gets emotionally taken out by a suspicious piece of fruit. And honestly, that is not a children's story. That is psychological warfare. And the more I reflected on it, the more I started wondering, what if the 7 dwarfs never represented separate people at all? What if they represented the different emotional states we move through when life pushes us out of what once felt safe? Because think about it. Snow White leaves familiarity, comfort, security, identity, and then suddenly she's thrown into survival and adaptation. And honestly, we do the exact same thing. We don't stay emotionally consistent when life changes. Some days we become withdrawn, some days defensive, some days exhausted, some days optimistic, some days emotionally disconnected, and some days weirdly over-rational, trying to analyse absolutely everything. Basically, the dwarves start rotating shifts internally. And maybe that's what they really symbolise. Not 7 companions, but 7 emotional states, 7 aspects of adaptation, 7 parts of ourselves trying to emotionally survive uncertainty. Because when life removes you from what once felt safe, you don't just discover the world, you discover yourself. And then there's the Queen, or more specifically, the old hag, which honestly fascinates me because the danger in Snow White doesn't arrive looking dangerous. It arrives disguised as kindness, warmth, gentleness, and offering, which is very human. Because not everything harmful enters our lives aggressively. Sometimes the most toxic things arrive looking exactly like comfort and connection. And maybe the poison apple was never just temptation. Maybe it symbolized trusting external comfort before fully learning how to trust your own intuition. Because Snow White escaped the original environment, but she didn't fully understand the pattern yet. And honestly, a lot of us do this. We leave one emotional cycle and immediately enter another one wearing a fake moustache and a different outfit. And then we arrive at the ending, the true love's kiss. And honestly, I don't think this was ever really about being rescued. I think it was about awakening, recognition, consciousness, returning to awareness after unconscious cycles. Because Snow White doesn't wake up because someone completes her. She wakes up because something finally breaks the illusion she was trapped inside. And maybe that's a real reflection hidden underneath the story. Maybe Snow White was never about finding a prince at all, or being rescued, or being cared for by 7 dwarves. Maybe it was about the emotional journey we experience after being forced out of familiarity, the many parts of ourselves we meet along the way, and the awakening that eventually happens when we finally start trusting our own awareness more than external appearances. Also, maybe don't take suspicious fruit from strangers. That feels like a solid life lesson overall. So maybe take this moment to reflect on your own story. What emotional cycles didn't you recognize at the time, but can suddenly see very clearly now? Where have you mistaken comfort for safety? Where have you trusted external appearances more than your own intuition? What parts of yourself emerged when life pushed you out of familiarity and into uncertainty? And which emotional dwarf tends to take over when you're trying to survive difficult periods of life? Because maybe the journey was never really about being rescued. Maybe it was about becoming conscious enough to finally recognize yourself underneath all the unconscious patterns. Because maybe awakening isn't always dramatic. Maybe sometimes it's simply the moment you finally recognize patterns that were quietly shaping your life the entire time. And honestly, maybe the real lesson of Snow White here is don't ignore your intuition, and definitely stop accepting suspicious apples from emotionally questionable people. We'll pick this up again soon, and I will see you there.